project is about joyous curiosity and being part of something much larger than ourselves. Here are some of the references that inform today's presentation, which is a meditation on arrogance, more aptly, hubris. Today's framework is the poem Ozymandias, and Napoleon Bonaparte is integral to the idea of modern Egyptology. Upon identifying the Palace of Memnon, also known as the tomb of Ozymandias, the French imperial power wanted to bring the granite head of Ramses II to France. This was in 1798. It proved to be cumbersome, and the French were unsuccessful. A little over a decade later, the British were able to transport one of the statues to England. That hole in his chest was due to the unsuccessful attempts by the French to transport it. Nowadays, institutions and cultural museums and collectors try not to directly damage the antiquities that they're after. So, with much fanfare, this object arrived on English soil in 1818. In anticipation of this heralded arrival, Percy Shelley and Horace Smith had a poetry competition regarding this object of great antiquity. The theme of both poems is the impulse to leave behind outsized tokens of our presence on the planet. The last few lines from Percy Shelley's offering are: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone level sands stretch far away. The sands obviously alluding to time in terms of epochs, really. Its twin still resides in Egypt, and Horace Smith's version takes the viewpoint of the future. We wonder, and some hunter may express, wonder like ours, when through the wilderness, where London stood, holding the wolf in chase, he meets some fragment huge and stops to guess what powerful but unrecorded race once dwelt in that annihilated place. A rather fatalistic view that one day a king or military leader would be roaming the world and waging war. That's what the chasing the wolf part is referring to, and find the ruins of London, similar to what the character of Charleston Heston had discovered in the 1968 cult movie Planet of the Apes. The durability of these massive structures, meant originally to embody noble possibilities, become a reminder of vulnerability, vanity, and insignificance. Hence the lines from Shelley: Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Everything disappears because time is an effective eraser. So is our self importance. The colossal Buddha statues in the Bamiyan Valley of Afghanistan, they survived centuries but couldn't withstand the onslaught of intolerance. Islamic inscriptions, I'm going to point now, one sees them right there, graffiti, I suppose, on Buddhist idols. And these idols were destroyed in 2001 by the Taliban. The divine irony is that the Taliban action realizes a tenet of Buddhism: impermanence. Buddhism isn't about idol worship or permanent structures or attachments. Another example of permanence being obliterated: the shelling of the medieval Croatian city of Dubrovnik by Serb forces during the Balkan Wars of the 1990s. Ruin comes with an agnostic approach. Centuries can go up in smoke. Monuments lost to time for centuries. In southeast Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, almost 10,000 years old, megalithic structures from Mesopotamia, the fabled cradle of civilization, because that's where urban centers first developed. This is the Fertile Crescent, yet not even its memory remained until this recent rediscovery. Stone reliefs abound, lions shown here. So here were people who loved and lived just like us. Where are they now? And in Mesoamerica, modern day Mexican states of Tabasco and Veracruz, the Olmec civilization survived more than 2 millennia. So the Olmec civilization was around longer than any recent empire that we know of, be it the Romans, the Mongols, the British. Where are the Olmecs now? Statues built to last as a stand in for them, all left in dust by time. Egyptian pharaohs, it's a case of another one bites the dust. Splendors silently screaming impermanence. So the Phoenician city Leptis Magna, that eventually became a thriving Roman urban center, was complete with a theater, market square, baths, and basilica. Lasting from the Iron Age to the Byzantine period, the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus came from this region, which is now Libya. Yet, if you ask the average person about Libya, at best you might hear of a Gaddafi, certainly not of lofty Romans. Ask the average person of Chan Chan. Good luck with its recollection. Most people might guess China. Wrong hemisphere. Try Peru. One of the largest pre Columbian cities, lasted 600 years until the Incas conquered them in 1490, or wait, around 1470. Yet the Inca glory was short lived because 50 years from then, the Spanish arrived and decimated the Incas. Chad, North Central Africa. The hollow inside of the rock reveals crude engravings of giraffes. I'm going to point. Here is the head, the ears of the giraffe, the long etiolated neck. There's the giraffe. Imagine giraffes. Quite a revelation, isn't it? That the arid Sahara was once a savanna and changed again. Desertification, it ebbs and flows. Engraved rock art on the rock face of Tibesti Mountains in North Chad. So there's the man with the spear, and I think it's so sweet. That's probably an ostrich on its side. All these are savanna creatures. And giraffes in the Tibesti Mountains weren't far away there. They are much more clear again, because this animal has captivated humans for centuries. When the British Natural History Museum opened, I researched their digital archives. A giraffe was the magnet. And in fact, the archives reveal that people used to call giraffes a camel leopard. Could you believe that? Because of the spots. So Al Ula, Saudi Arabia, and this is the Nabatean civilization, part of the trade routes for frankincense. And that is the wealth which helped create the rock architecture of Petra. All these civilizations, none survived. Absolutely no permanence, be it the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the British Empire, the Mongol Empire, name any of them, the ones in China, Japan, all of them, all basically done and dusted, faded glory. Give it another century or two, especially with the constant worship of the new of our Instagrammy age. Who will remember these massive infrastructures, many of them emblems of vanity that were created and upheld through oppression, and the sheer massive waste of natural resources? As indicated in the write up for today, this narrative is a meditation on arrogance, more precisely, hubris, which is a presumption that encourages disregarding limits. So, our beginning is the past. Ozymandias, king of kings. Here is young Memnon. If those smiling lips could speak, in silent, so reminiscent of those of another god king, in more ways than one you can imagine, because it is based, the statue of the Buddha on the left is based on the face of the Khmer king Jayavarman VII. Not so different from the pharaohs, the living Egyptian godhead, remember? So the Khmer too viewed themselves as god kings. Khmer is the term used to refer to the civilization in Cambodia. Incidentally, using humans as the visage for deities is not uncommon in antiquities. The face of Hercules has adorned many a Buddha statue from the Gandhara regions, which is by Afghanistan. I've seen one at the Art Institute of Chicago. And in fact, a Khmer Buddha resides, a beautiful one, resides in the Art Institute as well, in the Alstorf galleries. Jayavarman the seventh here, he ruled, he had a reign of 37 years, and he had embarked on a grand program of construction that included both public works and monuments. One of the most famous is the Bayon Temple at the heart of Angkor Thom city. So there's 216 gargantuan statues of Avalokiteshvara, which is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So though technically, Bodhisattvas, in this one case, Avalokiteshvara, it means the Lord who looks down, responding to compassionate cries, actually responding compassionately to cries of help. So the Avalokiteshvara term is really connected to the idea of sound. So these iconic visages are looking down, exuding power and control, because it is the face of Jayavarman the seventh. He is embodying himself as a god king, his magnanimous will beaming down on the city, staring down from high. Quite a political statement. Absolutely no hubris here, huh? Yet the Khmer architecturally is known not for the Bayon structure, they're known more for Angkor Wat. The dust being currently raised by the sweeper speak to the awesome power of time. That power of time in the scale of eternity truly is awesome. So, a temple structure of massive proportion and even larger ambition, Angkor Wat was built by Jayavarman II's ancestor, Suryavarman II. So there are very many important distinctions and differences, clues abundant in the iconography itself. So this man, Suryavarman II, when he was 14 or 15 years old, took power by killing the current ruler, his own uncle. Renowned for his charisma, Suryavarman II knew about branding. And we will be going into huge details in the story of the Angkor Wat 2 weeks from now in the presentation that is the architecture of faith. But here are some supporting facts for today's story. So imagine his, psychology. He killed to get into power. So he's entirely aware, because he's Hindu, that karmically he too may be killed for power. Consequently, he chooses as his patron god the Hindu god for protection, Vishnu. So Angkor Wat, unlike the previous temple that Jayavarman VII had built, Bayon, Angkor Wat is a Hindu temple. Well, actually, Bayon is a Hindu temple originally as well, because Jayavarman VII had converted to Buddhism later in life. So Suryavarman II and his Angkor Wat and Cambodia during his time were Hindu kingdoms. And so the inner structure is laid upon the Hindu concept, subsequently Buddhist concepts for the abode of gods, which is Mount Meru, the sacred five mountains of Hinduism and Buddhism. So there's one, two, three, four, and there's a fifth one in the back. And these temple mound opening, imagine you're looking down on it. They are opening, are symbolically representing the revered flower of Hinduism, the lotus. The petals are opening up. So it's the petal lotus blossom. So the Sahasrara, which is the 1,000 petal crown chakra of tantric beliefs, they all allude to the lotus. It is Mount Meru, known also as Shumeru. So in Sanskrit, the prefix Shu means good. Shumeru is blueprint for the mandala. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same framework for all of these presentations. So Mount Meru or Shumeru would be surrounded by an ocean. So here is the ocean, the symbolic ocean, which is this moat. It's just essential to Angkor Wat. In fact, this water is essential to the Khmer culture. In January of this year, so in 2021, one of the first presentations for this year was on erotica. Some of you might remember this from that presentation, at least this picture. We'd mentioned the 1,000 stone Shiv lingams in the flowing waters of Kulin Hills in Cambodia. So I'm going to point, these were the lingams. So lingam is the phallic representation of the Hindu god Shiva. So in a big picture scheme, observe that the relief also has the Hindu god Vishnu on the side, symbolically blessing the waters, which then flow downstream, resulting in fertile agriculture, the rice fields of Cambodia. Revenues from cultivating of these rice fields allow it, this is what allowed the Khmer region to prosper. They had enough food for themselves and ample to make money, wealth from trading. Population in this region in the 12th, 13th century was 1 million, with the urban core of 500,000 people. So, in comparison, during the same time, London had a population of 18,000 to 20,000. Massive difference. The population surged because it was successful and because it was brilliant water management. Irrigation allowed fertility that allowed for all this splendor to happen. Water, it's crucial to success. How else does one in the 12th century clear hardwood, really hardwood forests to build temples, not just any temples, stone temples, massive amounts of laterite stones that will be encased. And they use the same laterite stones in the temples in the Deccan, India. There were no stone quarries in the jungles of Cambodia. It was the waterways that allowed for transportation of unimaginable tons of rocks. So these saffron clad Buddhist monks who are praying now in what was originally Hindu temples, which is all perfectly fine because all rivers flow to the same ocean. So all worship is sacred because these temples are clad with the reliefs of the Kurukshetra battles from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. In fact, Jayavarman the Seventh's temple, Bayon, which we know as Buddhist, but it was originally Hindu, it used to be called Indapatha. Indapatha is the Pali Buddhist pronunciation of the temple from the, not the temple, the city from the epic Mahabharata. It was called Indraprastha. So Indraprastha becomes Indapatha in Buddhist lore. All these details one simply forgets because time devours all of this. Buildings, beliefs, everything gone. This is a NASA satellite picture. So the temples, and I hope you have time to come in 2 weeks' time because these stories are the, the infrastructure of Angkor Wat is fascinating. The temples were designed by priest architects. Make no mistakes. These architects were priests. Details will pour out in 2 weeks' time. So I'm going to point now, the hidden wonders, the inner square of the Angkor Wat. North of that is the city of Angkor Thom. So this is where resides the temple, the Bayon temple, that temple with all the faces, gigantic faces that they are. But what dominates this picture are these water reservoirs. You see them everywhere, and the channels of water, the canal structures that dominate the landscape. The Khmers had mastered irrigation long before the Dutch. Then they forgot. They simply forgot the importance of maintaining the waterways. They didn't maintain the armies, massive deforestation due to building projects, which led to water challenges. All that wealth, one of the largest cities in the world of the 12th and 13th centuries, disappeared completely by the 15th century due to mismanagement, among other things. So the Champa people, known as Chams, they're from Thailand because Thailand and Vietnam were the main enemies of Cambodia then. So the Thai sacked the Khmers, and then the forest took over until a resurged interest upon discovery by French in the 19th century. All that power reduced to silence within 500 years. Many, many such empires, with buildings concretizing their ambitions, have been reduced to dust in history. So, first century power centers. And so these are areas by Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, sorry, not Afghanistan. These were all part of the Silk Roads. They were sacked by the Mongols in the 13th century. And also, they were decimated because the maritime routes ended the Silk Road land routes. The story is about water again. This land had long been nourished by the Oxus River. When the Soviets initially expanded the system of water channels around the river because of irrigation, it was successful. Then they got greedy. Soviet cotton production targets overstretched the river. So the Aral Sea used to be fed by the Oxus, and the sea used to be 200 miles away, so the Aral Sea dried up. So these castles weren't originally surrounded by desert, although the desert wasn't too far away, because the land had been nourished by the Oxus. These ancestors didn't build forts without accounting for water. But the more pertinent story about Ozymandias, about things forgotten by time, despite our best efforts to keep them around, is that all those fields given over for agriculture, given over to cotton, these landscapes used to be archaeologically rich. Greed didn't care about preservation of history, preservation of heritage. So all this land that was raised over for agriculture erased history. They just took the land, grazed it, plowed it, any remnants of history, archaeology, gone. Because one has to care. Things have to be cared about enough to be bothered to be remembered. We don't. Which brings us to another aspect of hubris, evident as indifference, condescension, things not worthy of remembering, because oftentimes one doesn't remember anything but our own blinkered view of the world. Case in point, Syria. Any mention of it now, and the mind ricochets between Bashar al Assad and the almost 10-year Syrian civil war. The average reaction, if asked about Syria, is the image of Middle East war rubble, perhaps geopolitics, complicated history of violence. There's a propensity to skirt this area completely because it's so complex. We do have a blinkered, caricatured perspective. Isn't it worth remembering Shakespeare? Twelfth Night, Viola, Scene 4, Act 2. A blank, my lord, she never told her love, but let concealment, like a worm in a bud, feed on her damask cheek. She pined in thought. So the damasked cheek, meaning cheeks turning pinkish red, is an homage to the damask rose, named after Syria's capital, Damascus, the pearl of the Orient. Exported for centuries since the Crusades, thanks to its heady, rich, and smooth scent, the damask rose is used to produce essential oils and cosmetics. French perfume houses through the centuries depended on this 30 petaled flower. 3 tons of dried rose petals to make 2 pounds of rose essential oils. The rose perfumes Syrian culture. So roses decorates mosques. Roses decorate Damascene kitchens by enhancing the delectable dishes. Women choose it for skincare, and the pharmacists use rose for medicinal recipes. In fact, experts swear by the therapeutic properties of rose oil for fighting infection and for as a relaxant. The traditional rose harvesting festivals, because they made everything a celebration. All of that is disappearing. Collateral damage of geopolitics. This rose has always been linked to the memory and identity of Damascus and Syria. Rose water is used across the Middle East both as a refreshing drink, and roses are found in sweets such as Turkish delights. Speaking of Turkish delights, rose petal and pistachio Turkish delights make me heady with pleasure. Serve it with saffron tea, and you'll have all my time as long as you want. Because these pistachios, trees of the Middle East, with the nuts hanging in grape like clusters, Syria used to be a massive exporter. And despite the rose, if the Syrians identify with the flower, it would be jasmine. Damascus is known as the city of jasmine, white jasmine, yellow jasmine from 4 to 9 petals, essential for perfumes. Jasmine, the Arabic of which is Yasmin, Princess Yasmin of Aladdin. Can't you imagine the young Aladdin scampering through these alleys in some souk? It's well if you do, because those stories, though originally from India, came to Europe through Syria. So these were the times of Louis XIV, the Sun King with Versailles. Paul Lucas was effectively a tomb raider, a treasure hunter who found objects to satisfy Louis XIV's appetite for Orientalism. So Paul Lucas had a Syrian interpreter named Hannah Diab. There were many Syrian Christians in Paris during those times because Syria, with her coffee houses, were renowned for professional storytellers. And by storytellers, I don't mean liars, I simply mean people who made up stories. Lucas's friend, Antoine Galland, met the interpreter Hannah Diab and was captivated by the Syrian stories. So during those times, people around the courts were linguistically brilliant. They were very skilled. So Antoine Galland studied Turkic, Arabic, Hebrew, and Persian. Those are his own annotations on the documents, Galland's annotations. So Galland translated. Let's just say his R&D meant rip off and duplicate. So he created by copying and translating what we know as the Arabian Nights. Here's the frontispiece of Galland's book, 1001 Nights. I love the details, inaccurate though they may be. Persian king in a four-poster bed is as feasible as Louis XIV on a Japanese tatami mat. Not going to happen, but it is cute to look at. So, architecture, some of the best Roman ruins are preserved in Syria, Palmyra. Look at it. Amphitheater with dressing rooms behind the stage in Bosra, Syria again. Marvelous Roman ruins and mosaics are such a smooth transition to the world of art. Frederick Leighton, a street in Damascus, sun drenched street. I assume afternoon, people taking siestas, because the entire proverbial Orient shuts down in the afternoon, as goes the Noel Coward song, A Mad Dog and Englishmen Go Out in the Midday Sun. Leighton, the Englishman, did quite a few paintings that included Damascus, but he was not the only one. Caravaggio's Conversion on the Way to Damascus. But I don't think it's Saul, but likely the horse who is having the conversion. From one being ridden to one who is trying not to hurt the fallen. I simply love how the groom is concerned not so much with Saul on the ground, but with the majestic animal who is alarmed, eyes wide with panic, mouth frothing, and the groom calms him. It is in Damascus that Saul will be baptized and eventually become Saint Paul. Now, speaking of Bible, opera comes to my mind. Richard Strauss' Salome. Most likely Aubrey Beardsley illustrations. I love them. Well, there she is, Salome, past the seven Baal songs, with her prize, the head of St. John the Baptist. The actual head is said to reside inside this structure. So St. John the Baptist is venerated both in Islam and Christianity. This structure itself is inside one of the most famous mosques in the world, the Umayyad Mosque. It was originally a pagan site that was built upon by Romans as a temple to Jupiter. That temple to Jupiter was adjusted into a Byzantine church honoring St. John the Baptist. And in the early days of Islam, an adjacent mosque coexisted actually peacefully, and eventually the mosque dominated. So, positioned in the crossroads of Africa and Asia, Damascus was founded in the third millennia BCE, before current era, and is one of the oldest cities in the Middle East with a rich history, spanning Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, and Islamic civilizations. It includes also French influence, Russian cars, they're all there. So Syria, including Damascus, is an architectural manifestation of the word palimpsest. Traces of myriad cultures scaffold the city. Traces of myriad religions cement the Umayyad Mosque. And the historical importance of Syria is hinted at in these caravanserais in reference to the country's location on the ancient Silk Roads. High arches to accommodate the camels used for goods transportation, sleeping quarters for the traders were upstairs. And Damascus will surprise. Let's not judge the book by its cover. Old Damascus, undisturbed for centuries, has neighborhoods replete with 18th century mansions with decorated windows that open up to large indoor courtyards. The signature black and cream stripe architectural aesthetics, a quintessential Damascene look, is captured in paintings and photographs. Jaw dropping interior details, a symphony of color and carved wood, which decorate the walls and ceilings and makes one realize why it was called Damascus was the Pearl of the Orient. Its fabled storytelling culture continues even now. Oftentimes, after Friday prayers, by mosques in coffee houses all across Damascus, storytellers still hypnotize. Nostalgia unfolds. So, this bejeweled wonder, the lyricism of poetry that infuses most Islamic cultures, and although a Muslim majority, Syria remains a secular state. The warmth of the people, vendors with ornamented flasks that serve tamarind lemonade. I picked up my habit of cardamom coffee from a Syrian friend. One might never guess that matcha, yerba mate, that drink from South America, is hugely popular in Damascus. So all that complexity, all that extremely rich, layered history reduced to a byline: Syrian civil war, a large scale collective global amnesia, discounting everything else it was and is and may become again. The sheer hubris of controlling history, a rewriting of sequences, what is in Latin known damnatio memoriae. A famous example of this condemnation of memory is the Severin Tondo, and it resides in Berlin. So the Roman emperor who had come from the area that we discussed before, Leptis Magna, which is now Libya, he was Emperor Septimius Severus. Before his death, he had appointed his two sons, Caracalla and Geta, to rule as co emperors. So Geta was assassinated by his brother Caracalla, and as the sole Caesar of the Roman state, Caracalla declared a damnatio memoriae against his late brother. So this tondo, so tondo comes from the word for rotondo, so it's nothing more than a round plaque, clearly portrays Septimius Severus, his wife, and his son Caracalla as a smiling family with Geta has been erased. You can see him scratched out. So remember, during those times, in a society without much written documentation, memory training was a big part of Roman education. Social appearances, respectability were critical. So to be declared erased from existence was truly a condemnation. Cancel culture. Hubris indeed. Another example, following Domitian's death in 96 CE, CE is current era, the Roman Senate, embittered by the Emperor Domitian's authoritarian rule and practical paranoia, passed a decree against him. So they chiseled off his name across all inscriptions and removed the heads from any of his public statues, as can be seen in these photographs. So he was effectively erased from empire. If you delve deeper into history, 13th century BCE, so before current era, Akhenaten, one that the opera is based on, Tutankhamun's father. So during his own reign, Akhenaten himself had attempted to have all references to the god Amun chipped away to stop the worship of that god. Akhenaten had tried to establish monotheism, a worship of Aten, and after his reign, temples to the Aten were dismantled and stones reused to create other temples. Images of Akhenaten had their faces chipped away, and images in reference to the previous god Amun reappeared. Examples from more recent times, Ukraine has removed all, I think, 1,320 statues of the communist revolutionary Lenin following the government's drive to rid the country of all Soviet era symbols. We, America, as a country, is not far behind. This statue of King George III was placed in New York in 1770 with much pomp and circumstance. Within 6 years, in 1776, following the Declaration of Independence, fervent New Yorkers, with the help of Washington's soldiers, quickly pulled it down from its plinth and broke it into pieces. Much of the lead was shipped to Connecticut and melted down to make about 42,000 bullets for the newly independent country. That sense of out with the old and in to create a new is as American as apple pie. And perhaps it's a universal ethos. So in June 2020, protesters toppled a bronze statue of the 17th century slave trader Edward Colston, forcing Britain to consider its racist history. Colston, a merchant, profited richly from slavery. He had transported at least 80,000 people from West Africa to the Caribbean. Almost 20,000 of them had died on the voyages. Belgium, it's grappling with its colonial past. Their King Leopold's forces had seized Congo in the late 19th century and ran an exploitive regime that I guess had been the cause of deaths of millions. I'm originally from a country with a colonial past. India has had invaders galore. If most of the country can embrace this monument that was built by invaders, because Mughals were invaders to India, she also accepts this one, Victoria Memorial, a monument commemorating the other invader, the British Empire. India's acceptance comes with a, done and dusted mentality. There is no breaking down anything. It's an acknowledgement and acceptance and moving on. It's just how we approach our history and what we choose to commemorate. Now, to the present embodiment of Ozymandias, our current hubris, an almost horrific damnatio memori, the rapacious consumption of natural resources for the benefit of one species, us, out of almost 15 million species that are on this planet. This is only representational of a global phenomena. The previous administration had considered opening up about 10% of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So 10% is a massive square footage. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, is a wildlife paradise. Birds from 6 continents find their way here. This is where the deer and the antelope play. Drilling here would be sufficient for America's oil needs for only 1 year. All this proverbial God's country would be gone forever. Once gone, one would not know what existed, just like the richness of Syria is hard to imagine in its current places of squalor. So, this porcupine caribou herds, for example, this spirited prancing to her mother. How is this photograph any less sacred than Da Vinci's Madonna and Child? This Arctic fox resting among the lupins, quite an arresting still life. These snow geese, effectively feathered fighter jets, en masse across a valley bathed in gold. Just look. all these creatures, their habitats are precarious. Without floating ice to rest upon, bears and cubs like this will drown in the ocean from sheer exhaustion. And if that isn't enough, move beyond Alaska to the Arctic, a potential plunder beyond belief, because not everyone hates the warming of the earth, because it will open up the manna from heaven for shipping lines, the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea routes. If free of sea ice in summer, the time required to travel between Europe and parts of Asia and North America will be significantly reduced. That'll diminish fuel usage, which will be very cleverly packaged as less emissions. The second largest barrier reef in the world, the turquoise alternating with various shades of blue. In the mangroves, this mosaic mesmerizes. This is currently under protection, a temporary, hard fought for protection in Belize. So, all this beauty is very, very fragile and is a perfect stepping off point for the future. Our story is that which is truly fragile. Now, about our fragile human ego, the hubris that is at the heart of Ozymandias, eternal life. The textbook definition of hubris is the presumption that encourages disregarding limits. Nature has clear limits. The only thing in nature that never dies are cancer cells. Please meet Pager, a monkey who in this picture is being rewarded with a sip of banana shake each time he uses the joystick to play this video game successfully. The bits of missing hairs, I'm going to point right there on his scalp, though it is regrowing, is where Pager had been operated on by a robot. Precision brain surgery. Perhaps makes one wonder how many monkeys died for this next level of innovation, which is coming upon us. Because it's us above all species, always. Hubris. So, two chips were implanted into Page's brain. Please Google this video from the company Neuralink, which is owned by Elon Musk. You will be fascinated. And Elon Musk is not the only company investing in brain computer interfaces, which is BCI. So, in less than 4-minute video, one sees the monkey pager go from manually controlling the joystick to playing the entire video game with mind control. So, the chips in his mind directly interact with the computer, and it's been tested on a pig as well. Applications include the potential for paraplegics to use BCI, brain computer interface, to gain mobility, to gain autonomy, improve their quality of life. So they will be able to use the phone, work on the computer simply with mind control. Non US companies, countries with less regulations, are already testing on humans. Oh, wait, our story is going to get very fascinating very soon. To map the brain on a chip. So the declared long term vision is breathtaking levels of hubris. So our brains control everything. We sense everything in our brain. The goal for them is to map our entire neural network, our brain, to be precisely mapped. The illustration here captures it deftly. Think about it. Organs in our body, these parts, as we age, can be replaced, upgraded by perfectly recreated 3D printed organs. I am not joking. So far, a bladder has been successfully 3D printed. So, in the near future, potentially customized organs in the future of transplants, which is not a bad thing. So, if the body, which is effectively a casing for our minds, is taken care of, how to preserve the central processing unit of the human, our mind, the brain. You simply map the brain in a chip. Keep upgrading that chip in a perpetually recreated body. I am not making any of this up. Look at their interviews and look online. Welcome to a potentially eternal life. Again, this is not science fiction. Huge research dollars are pouring into this, along with massive, heavy investments in genetic engineering. Soon, perfect genes to be ordered up. Now, here comes sublime hubris. With a high functioning chip, why even need the body? If you like, close your eyes, imagine. It is only your brain that registers any sensation. It has to be processed up here for you to feel anything. Stilled, no movement, it is almost a meditative state where you are entirely alert without one ripple outside. So then you're in the complete state of consciousness. And it's only in states of consciousness. So that chip mapped, which is mapping your brain, may perhaps be connected to a massive mainframe in the iCloud. Isn't it ironic? The heaven in the clouds that the ancient religion speaks of may have been an iCloud. Science merging with religion. Because the point is, if you're living forever, why need religion? If there's no death, there is no heaven, there is no awaiting hell, who cares? Because it's fascinating. According to these designers, these technology designers, they don't value touch. As long as your brain is fed the sensation of touch, to them, it's exactly the same. It's their version of virtual reality, which, in a very odd, ironic way, it's what the Hindu religions call the illusion, a Maya, that none of this is real. They'll make that sentiment true. So the technology designers operating entirely in a world of binary codes, ones and zeros, they absolutely intellectualize the concept of transcendence. And our presentation comes full circle because from the poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley, we come to the story by his wife, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, where the real monster was the creator. The creator was Frankenstein. The creature that he created wasn't Frankenstein. It was the doctor, the creator, whose name was Frankenstein. He was the monster. And isn't it curious that hardly anything is now being built with a sense of eternity? New stadiums, any monuments, none are built to last as the ancients had attempted with with the pyramids, with Angkor Wat. They used to build that with the framework of eternity. We don't do that anymore. Nowadays most designs come with the idea of a necessary upgrade. The future, which is just about already upon us, that Ozymandias, that hubris, is so subtle. There is no need to build anything to commemorate our lives. There is absolutely no need to leave any impact because simply there is no need to leave at all. Live forever. Therein lies hubris, which is so completely antithetical to what it means to be a Homo sapien. The word sapiens is closely related to the word Sophia, which is often defined as transcendent wisdom. All this technological innovation which is coming, if it's not partly here, to me is learned intellect. My interest is entirely in realization, in insight. My interest isn't how we are built or with what material we are built or with chips which house us. I don't care. My interest is why were we built? What is our purpose? And so we'll now end where we started with a poem. And oh, Miss Betty, I know you recognize the Enso. Happy birthday for Saturday. I use this Enso because I thought of you. I will read the poem to allude to this why are we here, which is so much more important than how we were made. Makers of eternity, isn't it strange that princes and kings and clowns that frolic in sawdust strings and common people like you and me are builders for eternity? Each is given a bag of tools, an hourglass, a book of rules, and each must build before life has flown, a stumbling block or a stepping stone. So, August 12th, the voyage of discovery continues with the story titled Supply Chain, Genetics, and Inheritance. And 2 weeks from now, on July 22nd, is the third issue of the architectural series Edifices Complex. This time, the story is on architecture of faith. Among other things, we'll dive into the temple structure of Angkor Wat. And once again, please come as our guest to celebrate with us, your fellow participants. We'll have funny outtakes of previous presentations. Just come meet all of us. It'll be fun. Invitations, as I had said before, will arrive soon. 5 o'clock. It's going to be in the evening, champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It will be joyous. And as always, thank you for your time. I wish you joy. I'm going to stop sharing now.